Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Animal Encounters. Today, I'm covering the most deadly snake attacks ever. From a college student who grabbed a rattlesnake on a dare, to a reptile shop owner who reached out her bare hand to stop a snake from sliding off a hook. But first, we start with a girl who filmed herself with one of the deadliest snakes alive, but never made it to the end of the video. It was May 14th, 2021, in Orlando, Florida, a warm afternoon where the kind of heat that makes the air feel thick had settled over a quiet residential neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Inside a small, rented house, 23-year-old Irene Gascill was doing what she did most afternoons, setting up her camera, adjusting the lighting, and preparing for another video. Irene wasn't your typical 23-year-old. While most people her age were posting travel photos or food content, she had carved out an audience around something far more dangerous: venomous snakes. She was a content creator focused entirely on exotic reptiles, and she had legally obtained her animals under the permits required at the time. To her followers, she looked fearless, confident, and completely in control. But there was a detail that rarely came up in her videos. Irene had no formal certification as a professional venomous reptile handler. She free-handled her snakes with bare hands regularly. No hooks, no restraint tubes. She knew those tools existed, every serious handler knows. But picking up a king cobra with nothing between her palms and its fangs was what kept people watching. The views followed the risk. For a long time, that risk never caught up with her. That afternoon, her followers had been asking for another handling video. She hit record and walked toward the enclosure. Before we get into what happened next, let me tell you what she was actually dealing with. The king cobra is the longest venomous snake on Earth, capable of exceeding 5 meters in length. It can rear up high enough to look a grown adult directly in the eyes before it moves. Its venom is neurotoxic, meaning it doesn't destroy tissue. It shuts down the communication between your brain and your lungs until breathing simply stops. A single bite carries enough venom to kill an elephant. These animals are fast, perceptive, and when they feel threatened, they give you clear warning signs. The problem is recognizing them in time. Irene opened the enclosure and lifted the adult king cobra using only her hands. Immediately, the snake raised the front portion of its body, spread its hood wide, and began tracking every movement she made. This is not ambiguous behavior, a spread hood, a raised body, locked eyes. This is a king cobra, communicating that it has shifted into a defensive state. Irene continued repositioning the animal for the camera, adjusting her grip, finding a better angle for the shot. Then, one hand slipped lower along the snake's body. The cobra lunged forward and drove its fangs into her left forearm before pulling back and settling into a defensive coil near the base of the enclosure. Another person inside the house immediately retreated, secured the room to contain the snake, and called emergency services. I won't pretend this doesn't frustrate me that the tools that could have kept her alive were right there within reach, and she chose not to use them. The neurotoxic venom moved quickly through her system. During the ambulance ride, Irene was still conscious, but speaking became increasingly difficult. Breathing became increasingly difficult. By the time she reached the hospital, doctors placed her on mechanical ventilation and began administering antivenom alongside intensive supportive care. The volume of venom delivered had been massive. Despite prolonged and determined resuscitative efforts, her body could not recover from the level of envenomation she had sustained. Irene Gascill was pronounced dead later that same day. Following her death, authorities launched an investigation into the incident and began reviewing the permits under which her animals had been kept, examining whether appropriate safety protocols had ever been in place. Her followers and the broader reptile-keeping community responded with an outpouring of grief, but also with difficult and necessary conversations about the responsibility that comes with displaying venomous animals to an online audience. Irene built something real, a community, and a life she clearly loved. That's what makes this story so hard to forget. We just saw Irene's story end in Orlando. Now, we're heading to the forests of Pennsylvania, where one dare involving a timber rattlesnake turned Kendra Lake's summer bonfire into a tragedy. It was September 3rd, 2017, deep inside the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania, one of those warm, end-of-summer nights, where the air still carried the last heat of the season and the trees pressed in close around a clearing. A group of college students had built a fire in the woods for a late-season bonfire, the kind of send-off you plan when you know summer is running out and everyone is about to scatter back to their routines. 21-year-old Kendra Lake was at the center of it. She was outgoing, the kind of person who made any gathering louder and more alive just by being there. Competitive by nature, she had a reputation among her friends for never backing down from a challenge, and on a night like this, surrounded by people she trusted, with alcohol flowing steadily through the evening, that reputation was about to carry real consequences. At some point after dark, someone walked toward the tree line to collect more firewood. That's when they spotted it partially hidden beneath a layer of fallen leaves along the forest floor. A large timber rattlesnake lay coiled and still. Others came to look. The group gathered. And then, the way these moments tend to go, someone made it into a dare. A friend turned to Kendra and jokingly challenged her to pick it up. The group assumed the snake would move away on its own if disturbed enough. Nobody treated it seriously. That was the first mistake. The timber rattlesnake is one of the most medically dangerous venomous snakes in North America. It's a pit viper with heat-sensing pits that detect movement even in complete darkness. It disrupts clotting, destroys surrounding tissue, and causes internal bleeding that becomes harder to treat with every passing minute. These snakes are not naturally aggressive. Left alone, a timber rattlesnake will usually hold its ground or retreat, but grab one near the middle of its body where it has no leverage and no way to escape, and you become the threat. The response is immediate. Kendra reached down and grabbed the rattlesnake near the middle of its body. It instantly twisted and struck her right hand before pulling back and disappearing into the brush nearby. For nearly 30 seconds, people laughed. Then someone noticed the blood running down her hand. Then the swelling, rapid, aggressive swelling already climbing upward from the bite site. The laughter stopped. I think about those 30 seconds more than anything else in this story. Not as a judgment, because in the moment, nobody processed what had actually happened. But 30 seconds is a long time when venom is already spreading. The group immediately fell into disagreement about what to do, drive her out themselves or wait for emergency services. Weak cellular reception inside the forest made reaching emergency dispatch nearly impossible, which forced the decision. They loaded into a vehicle and drove toward the park entrance, hoping to intercept help along the way. The winding forest roads and the distance from the nearest hospital capable of stocking sufficient anti-venom added critical minutes to the response. Paramedics eventually met them en route and began treatment during transport. By the time doctors could fully assess her condition at the hospital, the venom had already triggered widespread clotting abnormalities and internal bleeding advancing aggressively through her system. Doctors believed the unusually large rattlesnake had delivered a heavy venom load, and the delay before definitive treatment allowed the toxins to spread extensively before antivenom could be administered. Antivenom was administered alongside blood products, but her condition continued deteriorating through the night. The damage was too extensive, and it had been moving too long. This is the part that stays with me when the group got it together. They did the right things. They got her help, but sadly, it just wasn't fast enough. Kendra Lake died several hours later. Doctors were unable to stabilize or reverse the extensive venom-induced tissue damage, clotting failure, and internal bleeding despite aggressive treatment. In the aftermath, local authorities and park services reviewed emergency response access across remote sections of the Allegheny National Forest, raising questions about how coverage in low-signal areas could be improved for future incidents. Kendra's family and the friends who had been there that night were left shattered, carrying the weight of what happened in those few seconds at the tree line. The story spread quickly across social media and outdoor communities, reigniting conversations about how fast a careless moment in the wild can become something you can never take back. Kendra Lake's story ended at the edge of a Pennsylvania tree line. But our next story takes us to the jungles of Thailand, where Mallory West's camping trip with friends took a turn no one saw coming after a monocled cobra appeared near their campsite. It was July 22nd, 2018, inside Khao Yai National Park in Thailand, one of Southeast Asia's oldest and most biodiverse protected areas, where dense jungle presses right up against every clearing and the sounds of the forest don't stop when the sun goes down. The air after dark carries a different weight out there, thick, humid, alive. It's the kind of place that reminds you, if you're paying attention, that you are a guest in someone else's territory. Mallory West was 31, an accountant who had planned this trip to escape the grind of work. I picture her wanting fresh air, long hikes, and the kind of peace you only find in Thailand's forests. Hiking was familiar to her, but venomous wildlife? That was something she hadn't really faced. And I can't help but think how excited she must have been, expecting nothing more than a weekend to recharge. Hey, we've all been there. One friend in the group, however, carried a habit that was going to matter. He was the kind of person who had encountered a snake before and decided that made him qualified to handle one. He told people he knew how to move a snake safely. Khao Yai is well known for its monocled cobra population, particularly active around campsites bordered by thick vegetation, precisely the kind of campsite this group had set up. By the time darkness settled and visibility dropped, a juvenile monocled cobra had already made its way into the area. The monocled cobra is a highly venomous elapid found across South and Southeast Asia. named for the single ring pattern on the back of its hood. Its venom is potently neurotoxic, disrupting the signals that control your muscles and breathing. Even a juvenile carries enough venom to kill an adult. They are fast, defensive under pressure, and when they bite somewhere critical, the margin for survival narrows almost immediately. And I think a lot of us are guilty of this. You go somewhere beautiful and wild and somehow convince yourself the danger is, just part of the scenery. When the cobra was spotted near camp, the overconfident friend grabbed it by its tail and swung it, attempting to throw it clear. The snake twisted violently mid-air and slipped free instead of being launched away. It landed directly across Mallory's shoulder. As she instinctively reached toward it, the cobra struck the side of her neck before dropping to the ground and coiling defensively. Park rangers arriving first had to locate and secure the cobra before medical personnel could safely enter the area. The nearest road was several miles away, requiring helicopter evacuation while Mallory's breathing grew increasingly labored. The bite on the side of her neck was one of the most dangerous possible locations for a neurotoxic envenomation. She lost consciousness during the flight as paralysis spread through the muscles controlling her breathing. Doctors administered anti-venom immediately upon arrival and placed her on life support, but the damage had already progressed beyond reversal. Mallory West never regained spontaneous breathing. Thai authorities launched a review of the incident, examining emergency access and response times for remote campsites inside Khao Yai. The case raised serious questions about how visitors engage with wildlife after dark in protected areas. Mallory's family was devastated, and the friends present that night were left carrying something they will never fully set down. Mallory West's story ended above the Thai jungle. But our next story takes us to the remote bush of South Africa, where Felicia Root ventured alone into Limpopo province with homemade equipment and a plan that left no margin for error. It was February 11th, 2020, deep in the Limpopo province of South Africa, one of the most remote stretches of bushland on the continent, where the landscape opens into vast dry terrain broken by rocky outcrops, sparse trees, and the kind of silence that makes it very clear you are far from help. The nearest paved road was several miles away. There were no other people out there, and nobody knew exactly where she was. 38-year-old Felicia Root had not come to Limpopo for the scenery. She was there to catch a gaboon viper alive and deliver it to wildlife traffickers willing to pay serious money for one. Felicia had experience with snakes. She had caught harmless species before and knew how to move through the bush. But the gaboon viper was a different category entirely, and somewhere in her preparation, that distinction got buried under the money being offered. She came equipped with what she had: homemade snake tongs, a cloth sack, and a backpack with basic camping supplies. No professional handling tools, no partner, no clear location shared with anyone who might come looking if something went wrong. She worked alone deliberately. Fewer people meant fewer chances of attracting wildlife authorities or competing traffickers. So she moved through the remote bushland by herself, following terrain where these snakes are known to shelter, until she found one. Honestly, I keep asking myself what number makes someone walk into remote bush alone with a homemade tool to catch one of the deadliest snakes alive. Whatever that number was, it wasn't worth it. Gaboon viper is the largest viper in Africa and one of the most dangerous snakes on Earth. It has the longest fangs of any venomous snake, reaching nearly 5 centimeters, and one of the highest venom yields of any snake. Its venom destroys tissue, damages blood vessels, and causes severe internal bleeding. A master of camouflage, it blends into leaf litter and can deliver a powerful strike before most people realize it's there. When Felicia located the gaboon viper, she positioned her homemade tongs and attempted to pin the snake behind its head, the standard method for controlling a venomous snake before handling. The improvised tongs slipped sideways. The gaboon viper drove its fangs deep into her bare forearm before pulling back into the brush. And here's the part that gets me. After the bite, she wrapped it with a shirt and started walking, not calling for help. That one choice tells you everything, and began walking back toward her vehicle, believing she could cover the distance before the venom overwhelmed her. Every few hundred yards, she was forced to stop. The pain intensified rapidly, spreading through her arm as swelling and blistering consumed the tissue surrounding the bite. Her vision blurred. Dizziness hit in repeated waves, causing her to stumble across the uneven ground as the venom dismantled blood vessels and destroyed surrounding tissue with each passing minute. She collapsed less than a mile from the dirt access road, close enough to see the end, but too far gone to reach it. Hours later, wildlife officers investigating reports of illegal reptile trapping in the area discovered her abandoned equipment. They followed her trail through the bush and found her body. Medical examiners concluded that the combination of severe envenomation, massive tissue destruction, internal bleeding, and the prolonged delay before any treatment was sought had left virtually no chance of survival from the moment she chose to walk instead of call. Wildlife authorities in Limpopo launched an investigation into the trafficking network Felicia had been connected to, working to identify the buyers who had contracted her and dismantle the broader operation. Felicia Root's story ended in the Limpopo bush. Our next story takes us to rural Florida, where Gemma Bowles broke into a farmhouse she thought was empty and found something waiting in the dark. It was October 9th, 2019, in rural Okeechobee County, Florida, flat, open, farming country, where properties sit far apart and the nearest neighbor can be a long walk down an unlit road. A farmhouse stood at the edge of an open field, no lights on, no vehicles in the driveway, no visible activity. To anyone watching from a distance over several evenings, it looked completely empty. 34-year-old Gemma Bowles had been watching it for exactly that reason. She had previous burglary arrests and had developed a method: observe a property for several nights, confirm it was vacant, move in after dark, move out clean. The farmhouse had checked every box. She had done this before. She knew what she was doing. Before leaving her vehicle parked down the road, she made a calculated decision. She left her phone locked inside. Digital evidence was a risk she wasn't willing to take. No phone meant no location data, no call records, nothing to place her at the scene. She approached the farmhouse on foot, entered through an unlocked back door, and stepped into the dark kitchen without a flashlight. What she had no way of knowing was that the homeowners had recently noticed snakes entering through a damaged crawlspace vent. The property bordered open fields where rodents were plentiful, exactly the environment that draws eastern diamondback rattlesnakes. Earlier that evening, one had followed prey inside and settled beneath the refrigerator. She slid that phone onto the car seat, thinking she was being careful. That single moment of calculation meant to keep her safe is the exact reason no one was ever going to find her in time. The eastern diamondback rattlesnake is the largest venomous snake in North America. Its hemotoxic venom causes massive tissue destruction, damages blood vessels, disrupts blood clotting, and can trigger life-threatening circulatory collapse that becomes increasingly difficult to reverse with every minute treatment is delayed. It strikes at roughly 1/3 of its body length, at a speed that makes avoidance nearly impossible at close range. In complete darkness, barefoot on a kitchen floor, with no warning, there was simply no chance. Gemma stepped beside the refrigerator. The rattlesnake struck her foot and retreated back beneath the appliance. The force knocked her backward. She slammed into a kitchen cabinet before hitting the floor. Unable to stand, she began crawling toward the living room in the direction of the front door. Every attempt to get upright ended with her collapsing again as pain intensified and swelling spread rapidly up through her lower leg. The venom was breaking down tissue and blood vessels, and it was moving fast. She shouted for help, repeatedly, but the farmhouse was too isolated, too far from any neighboring property for anyone to hear. No phone, no one who knew she was there, no one coming. I know she was breaking into that house, and I'm not excusing that, but hearing about someone lying alone in the dark, desperately calling for help that never came, is still giving me the creeps. By the middle of the night, the venom had caused severe circulatory collapse. When the homeowners returned the following morning and found her inside, she had been dead for hours. Emergency services were called, but there was nothing left to do. Investigators reconstructed the break-in from the scene, her path across the floor, and the eastern diamondback rattlesnake still coiled beneath the refrigerator. The case divided public opinion. Some focused on the burglary, while others focused on the fact that she died alone with no one coming to help. Gemma Bowles never made it out of that farmhouse. Our next story takes us to Arkansas, where Kara Gill escaped through a drainage culvert into the surrounding woods, unaware something else was waiting at the other end. It was April 28th, 2016. At a rural correctional facility in Arkansas, the kind of place where the surrounding land is dense with trees, rocky embankments, and the kind of darkness that comes with being far from any town. Heavy rain earlier that month had left the ground soft and the vegetation around the perimeter thick with overgrowth. Fallen branches pressed against the fence line. Beyond the outer boundary, the woods stretched out in every direction with no clear end. 29-year-old Kara Gill had been studying a way out for weeks. She had identified an old drainage culvert she believed extended from inside the facility to beyond the outer security fence, a maintenance channel that no one appeared to be monitoring as an escape route. She had watched it, timed it, and waited for the right night. She chose to go after dark, when visibility would be lowest and the chances of being spotted were smallest. What she had not planned for was what was waiting on the other side. The wooded area surrounding that facility was well known among staff for its timber rattlesnake population. Rocky embankments and drainage channels are exactly the kind of habitat these snakes favor in spring, when warming temperatures bring them out after dark. Kara didn't know that, and once she committed to going, turning back meant almost certain capture. I've covered a lot of these stories, and Kara's is the only one where the snake wasn't the reason the person was out there in the first place. She wasn't chasing anything or handling anything, she just put her hand in the wrong place at the worst possible moment. The timber rattlesnake has appeared in this series before, but it is worth revisiting here. Its hemotoxic venom attacks the blood, dismantling the body's ability to clot, destroying tissue, and triggering internal bleeding that becomes harder to manage with every passing minute. In the dark, in dense vegetation, on uneven ground, it is almost impossible to detect before it is already too late. Kara crawled through the drainage culvert and reached the exit. As she pulled herself clear, one hand came down onto the rocks beside the opening without checking what was there first. A timber rattlesnake sheltering beneath those rocks struck her hand before retreating into a defensive coil. She got up and ran. Back inside the facility, the escape was discovered, and an overnight manhunt was launched. Search teams, tracking dogs, and correctional officers moving through the surrounding woods in the dark. As Kara pushed deeper into the forest, the venom was already working against her. The run slowed to a jog. The jog slowed to a walk. Swelling spread through her hand and up her arm as dizziness hit in repeated waves. Her legs weakened beneath her. She stumbled through thick brush before collapsing near a creek bank, too exhausted and too envenomated to continue. Search dogs picked up her trail and followed it right to a muddy creek crossing where the scent broke entirely. The delay cost hours. Teams resumed tracking at first light and found her unresponsive near the bank. She had died from severe envenomation sometime in the night, long before anyone reached her. She spent weeks planning her escape. In the end, it wasn't a search team or a security camera that stopped her, and I don't think anyone expected to find her the way they did. The escape triggered a formal review of the facility's perimeter security, with authorities examining how the drainage route had gone unaddressed and what structural changes were needed going forward. The case drew public attention, with reactions split between fascination at the escape method and quiet acknowledgement of how Kara's final hours had unfolded. Her family was notified following the recovery of her body and made no public statement.
They found her just a short distance from where the culvert opened into the woods. Weeks of planning, and she never made it far at all.
Kara Gill's story ended at a creek bank in the Arkansas dark. Our next story takes us to a reptile shop in Houston, Texas, where Penny Rice was in the middle of a routine day at work, answering questions, handling animals when a snake surrendered by a customer turned out to be something far more dangerous than anyone in that store had been told. It was January 18th, 2022, inside a small independent reptile shop in Houston, Texas. Terrariums lined every wall, heat lamps filled the room with a warm glow, and customers browsed as if it were just another ordinary day. Penny Rice was 41 years old and had spent years building the business from the ground up. She began by breeding harmless snakes and eventually turned that experience into a successful reptile shop. She understood snake behavior well, but she was not licensed or formally trained to handle dangerously venomous species because her store did not intentionally keep them. I've always thought experience can become a trap if you're not careful. The longer nothing goes wrong, the easier it becomes to believe nothing ever will. Several days earlier, a customer arrived carrying a sealed transport container and asked to surrender a snake. The customer claimed it was simply a cobra that they could no longer care for, then completed paperwork identifying it as a false water cobra before quickly leaving. Because surrendered animals routinely arrived with owner-provided information, Penny accepted the container without opening it immediately. Instead, she placed the unopened container into quarantine to inspect later when she had more time. Unknown to her, the customer had either deliberately lied about the species or knowingly submitted false paperwork.
That's the part that sticks with me. Most people expect dangerous situations to begin with someone making a reckless decision.
Sometimes they begin with trusting information that never should have been wrong. Later that week, customers asked about the shop's newest arrival. Believing the paperwork was accurate, Penny opened the quarantine enclosure and carefully lifted the snake from its container using a snake hook. Since she believed it was a harmless false water cobra, the specialized restraint equipment used for venomous snakes stayed on the shelf. The snake started climbing up the hook toward her hand. She instinctively reached out with her bare hand to keep it from falling. The instant the snake spread its hood, Penny immediately recognized that it was a true cobra, not the harmless species described on the paperwork. Years of working with snakes allowed her to recognize the danger at once, but by then she was already within striking distance. Before she could pull away or safely pin the snake with proper equipment, it lunged forward and sank its fangs into her open palm. It's unsettling how quickly routine can disappear. 1 second she was answering customers' questions, and the next, every decision inside the room became about surviving the next few minutes. Employees quickly escorted customers outside while Penny backed away from the snake. Animal control safely secured the cobra without anyone else being injured. Monocled cobras produce a powerful neurotoxic venom that can paralyze the muscles responsible for breathing. Penny was rushed to a nearby trauma center, where doctors immediately administered antivenom and admitted her to intensive care.
Despite aggressive treatment, the venom caused severe complications, and she remained on mechanical ventilation.
Over the following days, her condition continued to worsen despite every available treatment. She ultimately died from complications caused by the cobra bite, an uncommon outcome today, but one that can still occur in particularly severe envenomations. Modern medicine has dramatically improved survival from venomous snake bites, but even rapid treatment cannot guarantee that every patient will recover. Authorities later investigated who had surrendered the snake, whether the species had been intentionally misrepresented, and why the animal entered the shop under inaccurate documentation. The case highlighted the dangers of relying solely on owner-provided identification when accepting surrendered exotic animals, particularly species capable of causing fatal envenomation. What bothers me most isn't that a venomous cobra existed, it was always dangerous. The real failure happened before anyone opened the transport container. The tragedy wasn't that Penny couldn't recognize a cobra, she recognized it immediately once it spread its hood. The problem was that someone else's deception had already placed her within striking distance before she ever realized the paperwork couldn't be trusted. Penny Rice's story ended inside the shop she had built from years of genuine passion. She wasn't taking a needless risk or failing to recognize the animal in front of her. She acted on information she had every reason to believe was accurate.
By the time the cobra revealed its true identity, there simply wasn't enough time to avoid the bite.